Hey everyone and welcome back to today's video. So in my November wrap up you would have seen me talk about the fact that I left out two books that I read in November. So today I'm here to talk about those two books, and I also managed to speak about two other books in that previous video, but I took those clips out and I will merge it with this video. In that other clip I talk about Girl, Woman, Other, the joint Man Booker Prize winner, and then, or just Booker Prize winner, and then I talk about another book called Seven Lies, which was a NetGalley release. I recommend you check them both out. One, because I absolutely loved Girl, Woman, Other, and two, because Seven Lies was just all types of hilarity, and just watch it so you can listen to me just revel in how funny it was. But yeah, today I'm going to talk about Seed to Harvest, well, two of the books in here, which is Wild Seed and Mind of My Mind. This is Octavia E. Butler's Pattern Master series. The way that these books are put together is not the order that they were published, but I think it's basically the chronological order if you looked at the dates and sort of where the story was set. So I don't know, the publisher has put these together. So I have read Wild Seed, and that's the first one that I'm going to talk about. So Wild Seed is a book that is set in West Africa. Our main character, Anyewu, is what I'm going to call her. I don't know if that's correct, but she is living in West Africa, and someone comes across her, and you find out it's like the male entity called Doro. He comes across her. Now, Anyewu is a healer, a shapeshifter. She can basically heal herself if anything happens to her, but she can also take up the form of other people, and I think she can actually also take up their DNA, so she can take the form up of people as well as animals. And she has lived for centuries and centuries, and so has Doro, and this is the first time that Doro has ever come across someone just like him who has lived just as long as him. So I think this book actually takes place like in the 1400s. It's, yeah, my memory is a bit hazy about it, but that's where it starts, and we start in West Africa. Doro manages to convince Anyewu to come with him as he travels to America. It's really interesting because Doro can also take on the bodies of other people, but unlike Anyewu, he can't just mold himself into those people. He has to actually physically take their bodies, so therefore he has to kill them. Essentially what happens between these two is he manages to like take her away from Africa, sort of in a sort of threatening way. He basically, you know, showcases like how powerful he is, explains how powerful he is, and she fears for like her many descendants. She's been alive for so long, obviously she's had, you know, children born and died, grandchildren, all that sort of stuff. But I guess with a little bit of that threat and the fact that she's quite curious about Doro, she decides to follow him over to America. And there's just them interweaving themselves through like slavery, and then eventually settling in America. Whilst Anyewu is accompanying Doro, she begins to find out exactly like what he's been doing all his time. Basically he has been breeding people like him, except these people don't have the powers he has, and I don't think he's actually come across anyone who has the same power as Anyewu, but these people can move things with their minds, they can read other people's minds, but they have various different powers, and what he's trying to build is a complete super race. But the more that Anyewu finds out about this, the more that she's like really disgusted by it, especially because she just feels like it's very dehumanizing that these people are just bred for this purpose. But more so she finds out that like he's doing things like having brothers and sisters be with each other, like have sex with each other, cousins and all these sorts of things, and she's just like, that is a sin. So Anyewu has a huge problem with this because, as I mentioned, she just finds it really dehumanizing. And there is another bit where basically, I don't want to spoil this bit of the book, but you know, he does something to her. There is a betrayal of her trust. He lied to her in order to get her like to where he wanted, and it wasn't what she was expecting. So there's a lot of that betrayal, but these are basically two people who live for centuries, so they have to like eventually get on with each other or find a way to coexist and live side by side. As this book was released after the Mind of My Mind, this book sort of sets the scene or the relationship for Doro and Anyewu, and you sort of understand maybe in later books why they are the way they are, but it's just a bit of back history. It is essentially a little bit of a love story. But what the book manages to do is tackle a whole range of issues. Like it tackles sexuality, it tackles class, it tackles sexuality, gender roles, slavery. I think I already said gender roles, slavery. Like it tackles so much, and also that sort of notion of submissiveness. Doro is always saying, or at least in his head, or maybe he does say it to her, that he wants her to submit, and I think that's just there's just so much talk here of that sort of submission element of a woman to a man. That's very interesting when the woman is just as powerful as the man. because he's always like, I could kill you, but you don't actually know if he can, because he hasn't come across anyone like her, and whereas he's able to kill everyone else, they don't have the same abilities as him, and he's finally sort of met his match. So I really enjoyed this book. It wasn't like my favourite, I've only read 2 and 4 to be fair. It wasn't my favourite, but it was an interesting dynamic. There's a lot of like commentary on just like women roles, gender roles, and the sort of difference in what her life was like in Africa, so like pre-colonial Africa, and then being brought over to the US, and even for her just for the first time like seeing a white person and things like that. So there's a lot of interesting like commentary in here, a lot of interesting thoughts in here, and it's a really like enjoyable book. There definitely is a huge fantasy element in this book that I liked. I didn't think it was too crazy out of the world. In a way, it sort of reminds me of Heroes. Mind of My Mind was the next book that I read in this, and it absolutely blew me away. The thoughts that are available in this is just mind-blowing. So what Mind of My Mind is I think it's about 5,000 years later. I don't know, it's really hard to tell, and I don't pay attention to dates. But one of Joro's like little projects, his little human, Mary, that's her name, I was going to call her Emma. Emma is who Aniwu is now going by after many years. But one of Joro's like projects, Mary, is, you know, pumped up to be this like super child, but he thinks she is the one that, you know, he's like years and years of training have gone into her, decades of training have gone into her, and he thinks he's finally found like the perfect person. And she does turn out to be that person. She has immense power. Much like all the other people, she has the ability to like read people's minds. She can look into people's minds, and they undergo this thing called transition, which to be honest just sounds like a form of childbirth but without giving a baby. But it's just this really painful thing these people are going through. Like, I don't know, they're having like tremors, a lot of them have to be like tied down, restrained to the bed because they're like screaming. They're just in a really dark place, and they're able to feel like the thoughts and the actions of really bad things happening to people around them. So like sitting in a city like Glasgow, I'd be able to feel if someone was getting stabbed, I don't know, about 10 miles down the road. They're able to feel that, and it's not like it never gives up. So they finish feeling that, and then the next person feeling pain, they feel that. So it's that sort of sense that they can really feel everything. So yeah, Mary is a telepath, and that's what these people are called, and loads of these people have that. And not everyone comes through transition. Most people die through transition. It's quite a very painful thing, but Mary comes through, and once Mary comes through, she unlocks this power that no one else has been able to unlock. And this series is called the Pattern Master series, and that's basically what she unlocks. She unlocks the pattern, and through the pattern she's able to connect with other telepaths, but essentially lock them into her pattern so that they're all joined together. And it's really weird. So basically they all kind of feel like when they get away from her, they feel really ill. But obviously as human beings, as people who had done other things in their own right, they're all in different parts of America, so they're all sort of drawn together. At first they're all really angry, but then they all start working together as like a community, to sort of build their own little community, but also in a way like heal other telepaths that have fallen off the radar of Joro, because, you know, he's been there doing his mass breeding program, but everyone that he didn't think was suitable for him, he just left them with their families. And obviously to be a normal human being and also be a telepath, and there are other people who are just normal human beings, like, you feel everything that they feel basically, and it could drive you mad. It drove a lot of people mad, and so she's able to sort of bring these people that are out on the fringes to create this really awesome community. The book is an interesting show of power dynamics, because Emma is, you know, reaching her power, her full capacity, and she has all these people behind her. It's crazy the immense sort of power she has, and it's just like, will she be able to overthrow Joro? And like, because Joro basically keeps trying to put her in check, so that's why the power dynamic is interesting, because he then realizes this thing that he wanted to create, he actually cannot control, and that's what becomes very interesting in this book. Again, I think with this book, I did really like it. The plot was there, but it all like played out really slowly, which was fine, because it was about getting to know the different characters and how their powers work and how they all sort of come to work together. But for me, it was just that subtle idea of the pattern and having people locked in. Like, she essentially locks them in like her brain, so they're all like a little family, even though they're all, I mean, they all descend from Joro, so they are a family, but it's just when they all begin to work together, they actually realise that we don't want to leave this family, like this community is really cool, when they start like building schools and stuff. But the one thing that I wasn't really happy about was the fact that they didn't take over the sort of, they mind control the humans basically, and there's not much free will given to the humans, so that was a bit like, not sure I like that. But it's just the idea that Mind of My Mind puts into your head. But that was the 2 books in this. The other 2 books is Clay's Ark and Pattern Master. I really think Mind of My Mind might have been the one to have been released first. I'm not sure. I feel like it was Mind of My Mind and then Clay's Ark. I'm not too sure, but I definitely know Wild Seed was like one of the last ones to be released, and it just provided that sort of background story for Doro and Anyewu. So yeah, that is me done talking about those 2 books. I spoke about the fact that I read these books in my what it's been like reading sci-fi for a year video, and now I'm going to leave you guys. I'm going to insert the clips from the other November reads wrap up video where I talk about Girl, Woman, Other, and then 7 Lives. So yes, I will catch you in another video. Bye. So the next book I read is Girl, Woman, Other by Bernardine Evaristo. So yes, the other half of the Man Booker Prize winner. I actually wished for this on NetGalley and then it came through, so I was like, yes. So I read it and I thoroughly enjoyed this. I ended up giving this a 4 out of 5 stars. And I will talk about the reason why it got 4 and not 5 in a bit, but I completely get why this won the Man Booker and like why it was on the radar. It's very current, it's very topical, and it's, yeah, I really enjoyed it, especially as someone who comes from London. It's always fascinating to me to hear how other people experience London, and just, I don't know, yeah, the different experiences that, you know, even fictional characters may have in London, because I obviously assume they're really based on people that she knows. It sounds like a lot of research went into this book as well. This book is about 12 British women, and I guess 12 British women, maybe 11 British women, 1 non-binary who identifies as they, them, and yeah, they all like have a sort of crossover in London. I think they all actually do live in London, but like there's a very starting point, or at least there's a focal point on London in their lives. And what I loved about all of these characters is that they were, to me, they all felt really fully formed. They felt fleshed out, they felt like real people. The story, this book reminds me a lot of Homegoing, because there's a lot of characters in here and there's a lot of stories in here, and I just feel like she could have picked one character and made a whole book of it, and that would have been completely fine. So I feel like to do what she did is spectacular, because there are so many narratives going on, but they all feel spectacular. All the characters, yeah, like I said, are fully flawed, but they're all flawed, which is just wonderful. You know, you always have stories where people are flawed, but some of these people's flaws are just so relevant and topical to right now that you're really able to read them and try and maybe understand the people around you. This book is about how people become the way they are, and I'm super nosy and I love books like this. I love just sort of like hearing from people that I think are really interesting and just hearing their story of how they've done things. I love it. And so what this book does is focus on 11 different women, 1 non-binary, and it basically takes you from like their childhood, or maybe it will start in like their 20s, their teenagehoods or something, all the way right through to like sort of where they are at the moment, because a lot of these stories are told, a lot of these people are like in relation to other people. So you might hear from our character Amma, but then you hear about her mum, and then it goes on to be her mum's story in the next chapter, and it spans like decades, because the characters are different ages. It's really interesting in this book because my favourite characters are the sort of people that I guess I'm going to mention now. I'm going to mention 2 people in terms of their flawed thinking, because I think they're really important to how like a lot of people think today, and how it's so important to not just write people off because they don't understand something or they say something wrong. The first character I'm going to talk about is Hattie. Hattie is the grandmother of the non-binary character Morgan, and the reason why I don't know, I think about Hattie is the sort of, she doesn't understand Morgan's identity, doesn't understand it, you know, sometimes says the wrong thing, but in the end says to them, you know, I don't understand, like this wasn't something that was part of my generation. And I know a lot of people think that's not an excuse, but I think there are a lot of things that happen in generations that are quite easily sort of embedded, and then new things come up and then they can't take those new things, and basically I liked that flawedness, because I think a lot of older people do feel that way about certain things. They don't understand them. And when I say Hattie was reaching, like she was like 90 or something, like I don't know, like very much nearing like hundreds. She was like near death's door, like she was still really strong and everything like that. And I think there was just this sort of thing where I'm not prepared to like change my thinking, but I still really love you. And Morgan, they were able to take it as, you know, really upset at the beginning, but they in the end sort of got used to it. And you know, loved their grandma, so was making allowances for that. My other character that I thought was flawed, which I kind of thought was just really funny, but I think a lot of women make this decision on a day-to-day basis, and not in a really grand way. It's really subtle in the same way that this character made this decision, and that character is Penelope. Penelope says at one point, like towards the end of her story, something, she's dating a man, and she basically says something about how she's prepared to put aside feminism and the goals of feminism for her own personal happiness. And I think that is so super important. Like, it's so super important that that was acknowledged, because I feel a lot of women do that. I feel like a lot of us are here for feminism, but I feel like sometimes there are parts of the movement, feminist movement, that are not going to serve you and your own personal happiness. And her just writing that out loud, I'm just like, that to me is great, because I don't know if I would consider that flawed. I consider that sort of like self-care and knowing like what is right for your life, but it was just the way it was mentioned that I thought that's really important. So yeah, this book, honestly, like, it's really hard to encompass what it is. I think it covered so many characters and their lives that this book felt like a really full book, and, you know, character interwoven, and it covered so many topics, you know, mental health, what it's like being a black woman, being at university, being an outcast, so many things. There's sexual violence in terms of like lesbian relationships, there's just so much going on in this book. Each of these characters, as you can imagine, has their own fully formed life. But what I will say about the characters is the first 2 or 3 characters felt like, to me, a lot of what I don't like about books that are about London. And maybe it's just because it's not my experience, but I felt like the first 3 stories were just super weak and padded out with this sort of, this is what, you know, people can experience London as. I just felt that some of them were a bit far-fetched, some of them were just a bit too not quirky, I don't want to say that, that's the wrong word. Some of them just felt a bit too try-hard to be different, and then as the other stories went on, then it felt really fully formed and fleshed out, and like these were real stories and real people. The ending is also why I knocked down a star, because it sort of ends with all of our characters sort of meeting in the same room, and you see how they interact with each other and things like that. I just felt like that could have been done without. The character stories on their own was really important, and to be honest, the stories of like Amma, or not Amma, Yaz, or her mum and her mum's best friend weren't really my interest. It was the stories of the other people that I really liked, and I felt like they were really good. So I come to the final book that I read this month, and honestly, I feel really bad. Like, I'm not going to be harsh and slate this book. This was a Nat Galley review, and I have reviewed it on Goodreads if you want to read my review. But this book was all over the place, and I remember just explaining the plot to my boyfriend once I finished it, because I was just like, what? I'm not sure if I said the title of this book. This book is called 7 Lies by Elizabeth Kay. And it's about the friendship of Jane and Marnie. They've been best friends since they were like in secondary school, so yeah, 11 years old, and they've been inseparable. They leave school, you know, start living life and things like that, and you know, they both start to go like their different ways in life, but they live together, and it's just really cute to see how their life begins to develop. The book is broken down into I guess 7 sections, and within those sections there are chapters. So there's the first line, the second line, the third line, the fourth line. I'm not even joking, by the time we got to the 4th line, I'm like, I'm convinced this girl has told more than 4 lies. Like, come on now, this is silly. But this book details Marnie's husband died and what life was like after that. Jane is the one telling us the story, and Jane is essentially really trying to narrate to us how close their friendship was, what happened to Jane herself when she fell in love with someone. There's a whole story there, and now how she has to have dinner every Friday night. She goes for dinner at her friend Marnie's house, and you know, she has to sit through dinner with Charles, who she really hates, and Charles ends up dying, and then it's about the story from then on. Wild. Like, I wish I could explain this book to you guys so that I could not ruin, but I don't want to ruin this book for anyone. But the things that happen in this book, I'm like, unbloody believable. Like, don't even. Our narrator does like a horrific job of trying to show us, or really talk at us, at how close her and her friend are. And I feel like as a reader, you want to be able to get that from how their day-to-day interactions are and the things that they've done in their lives together. You don't want to be told, we are this close because of XYZ. There is a particular scene where she's talking about how close they are, because rather than travel, they leave their house and go to the tube, and rather than travel in separate carriages, because it makes sense to travel in separate carriages because she can get off closer to her exit, she explains to us they don't do that because they're that close. And I'm like, I don't think that's a sign of you two being close. I think it'd be really rude if you went and sat in the next carriage just because it's closer to your exit. Like, you'd only have to walk for like an extra 30 seconds. So it's just a bit like, I don't know if this is a sign of her being crazy, which they do try and do in the book, or just, I don't know. But I read that and I was just like, that's bloody ridiculous. Like, if I was with my friend, like, unless I wanted to read or like they wanted to do something in peace, but really if you're on the tube, it's usually so jam-packed when you're going to work. Like, you just wouldn't do that. You would sit, you'd go to the same train carriage. So I was just a bit like, nah, that's weird. But it's essentially about the lies that Jane has told, and, you know, I just felt like the character of Jane wasn't well fleshed out. She did things that I didn't think was like true to her character. The biggest flaw in this book is a journalist that goes hunting through the sort of death of Marnie's husband and sort of tries to unravel what happened there, and to see if there's a story there. The reason why this was good is because that's what added the suspense element and sort of kept Jane on her toes, and you sort of try and find out what really went down that night, even though like you as a reader already know, you're just trying to see if the journalist can find out. The issue with the journalist story was it just trailed off. Jane has a couple of run-ins with her, says something to her about her being lonely because apparently, you know, the journalist doesn't have any of her friends that she had since she was like 10. The journalist is like, comes back another day, says, you upset me, that's not the truth. Good luck with the whole thing with Charles and Marnie, and just walks out of their lives and you never hear from her again. And I'm like, that is an awful use of a plot. Like, that is so unbelievable because the character she built in the journals is someone who kept on digging. So I don't believe that character would have been satisfied with that ending. Like, it makes no sense, and it makes no sense to have brought that character there to bring the suspense and then take them away like that. It's like, I get what the story was trying to achieve like that, but it's not a natural sort of removal of that character, and therefore makes the whole story really unbelievable and just makes you think, what the hell was everything else for? And then there are just, yeah, so many other little stories in there. There's the sort of tale that wants to be told on the illness that Jane's mother has. Jane's mother has dementia. She has a sister that has an eating disorder, and there are these like sort of side stories happening, and there clearly wants to be a commentary on sort of these illnesses and how life views them. But it's really hard to mix that up in the story that is trying to be told, which is a sort of suspense thriller, especially with the main character that she's picked. So this book was just running off in 10,000 tangents, and I was like, this book is awful. Like, and that's how I'm going to conclude. I would like people to read this book just so someone can tell me if I'm just being really horrible. But I am glad I read this book because it has given me some good laughs. But overall, yeah, as a story and as a reader, I wasn't happy with trying to be force-fed the fact that Jane was insane, and it felt like very much that was what was happening. Rather than show us, we were being told explicitly so that this is what we believed, and it doesn't work. Like, that doesn't work. You can't really spoon feed your readers things like that. So yes, that has been my November. That has been my November read. It's been varied. I think one thing I'm aware of is that I haven't picked up a physical book, which means I haven't been reading the books that I have. I have got a bunch of books from NetGalley that I sort of requested, so I'm going to get through some of those and try and read some of the books on my shelf. But guys, we're like into December now, so it's going to be like the end of the year before we know it. But thank you so much for watching this video. If you would like to talk to me about any of the books that I mentioned, please just do leave me a comment down below. I'd love to hear from you, and I will catch you in another video. Bye!